Welcome everyone. Thank you for spending your evening with the ACLU of Washington. My name is Monserrat Padilla and I will be your MC of tonight's Centennial celebration. It's a little sad to not be able to be in person as we had planned, but we hope that you feel connected with one another by commenting if you're in front of your computer, filling your soul with food and drinks from restaurants and chefs from around the state, and through being present in this shared experience. Tonight we'll hear from a couple leaders, be in conversation with activists from around Washington. We will also present 2 awards, and then we'll take the rest of the night with some music. First, can Workman tell us about the land we occupy?
This word, it means workman. Workman is my name. I am workman of the Duwamish tribe. And great grandson of Chief Seattle. I don't work anymore. That I don't work anymore for this great big airplane factory in Seattle, and that I am retired. I'm retired from the Boeing Company's flight operations engineering, where I worked as a systems and data analyst. And so when we talk in this ancient language of Lushootseed, the language spoken by my grandfather, this person the world knows as Chief Seattle, this language is taken from us, but it's starting to come back, and our young people, they're starting to speak it once again. It was taken from us in the boarding houses, and then it was taken from us when our children came back. But it's starting to come back alive once again. And so this is an important thing. It describes who we are. So when we say duwabs, this word du, it means inside, and abj is people. Duwamish is the English pronunciation of this name. So we are the people of the Duwamish River, the Hibach-Stolok, the Black River, the Hachiwabs, and Lake Washington people. We constitute the Duwamish tribe, Baslak Hill, today. And so in 1851, my grandfather stood on the shores of Alki, and he welcomed the Denny party, these strangers, onto this land. And so he said something like this. He said, Slalil disiyaya, Slalil andisha pada te lok dawabs. Come ashore, my friends. Come ashore onto this land of the ancient Duwamish people. Gui disiyaya. This word, gui, it means welcome. And so this was his official welcome. And this was the day that Seattle changed. For 10,000 years, we as Duwamish people have lived and died on the hills and the valleys here in Seattle. And virtually overnight, everything changed. And so we see Seattle today as an international city, and that we as Duwamish people recognize that the world is much smaller. Skoy mother swatufted. Mother Earth, that we recognize Mother Earth is a small place today. And so we as Duwamish say the same thing that my grandfather said in 1851, except we modify it a little bit by saying Gwigwihidak, which means everybody is welcome. Gwigwihidak to see ya adisha parate lok Duwabs. That all people from around the world, they are welcome here in this city named after my grandfather. So it's my honor to say those words to you again today. Gwigwihidak, Gwigwihidak, Gwigwihidak. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. We must be grounded in community in order to know where we're heading. Our first speaker this evening, the National ACLU Executive Director, Anthony Romero. He took the helm of the organization just 7 days before September 11, 2001 attacks. Born in New York City to parents from Puerto Rico, Anthony was the first in his family to graduate from high school. Anthony is the first Latino and openly gay man to serve in that capacity. Friends, please help me welcome to the screen, Anthony Romero.
Thank you for inviting me to join you. Hi, I'm Anthony Romero. I'm the National Director of the ACLU from New York, and I'm delighted to be joining the ACLU Washington State, celebrating with you virtually, of course, but delighted to be with you this evening. And I just want to thank you all for coming together, for giving us your time and your support, your belief that we can create a more perfect union. This is a time when we need to huddle, those of us who are trying to make a difference and make change in the world. From the very beginning with the Scottsboro Boys, when a group of young black men were being charged wrongly of raping 2 white women. The ACLU had the courage to jump in to that first most famous of racial justice cases in the criminal courts. You've seen the other cases, the Scopes trial. They made movies out of it, Inherit the Wind. That was our case, our client. We found Scopes. We put a newspaper ad in Tennessee and said, if you want to teach evolution in public science classrooms, please be in touch. Scopes raised his hand, and you know the others. Loving versus Virginia. Mildred Loving wanting to marry her white husband. Our case, our client. Griswold versus Connecticut, the right to contraception. Our case, our client. Miranda, the right to remain silent from the TV shows. Our case, our client. Gideon, the right to a court-appointed attorney. Also our case, our client. Obergefell, the right for same-sex couples to marry. And then most recently, in the last couple of years, you've seen the Bostock case in the Supreme Court, extending employment rights to LGBT people. Our case, our client, Amy Stevens, who passed away just recently, tragically. This is our organization that has had energy and dynamism and commitment, even in the toughest of times. And these are tough times. I will be candid with you. I want you to know what we're battling against. Right now, we are fighting a battle on 4 fronts. First, Trump is still president of the United States. And as long as he is president, we have to stand watch, and we have to be able to challenge the worst of his policies that are anti-civil liberties and anti-civil rights. When he was elected, we were quick out of the box to say that he would be a one-man constitutional crisis, and that we promised that we would see him in court. But we've kept that promise, and even more so. We have filed over 400 legal actions against the Trump administration since 2017. Second front is having to do with the COVID pandemic. Obviously, I would be there in person with you if I could be, but this pandemic has changed every aspect of our public and personal lives. And the pandemic especially has had an enormous impact on individuals who have been incarcerated or detained. The ACLU has filed over 166 lawsuits on behalf of medically vulnerable people in prisons, jails, and immigrant detention centers. We brought a number of lawsuits to keep abortion clinics open and have access to reproductive health services. The third front in the wars we're fighting has to do with police brutality and the fact that Americans now recognize that police brutalize communities of color in ways that are inappropriate, immoral, unlawful, un-American. The ACLU, as I mentioned, has always been engaged with police reform. Miranda and Gideon were our earliest cases. Michele Alexander, before she wrote The New Jim Crow, was the head of our racial justice program in San Francisco. So just this year, in the aftermath of the protests following the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, we doubled down and launched a police reform campaign to shrink the funding and to shrink the presence of police in communities of color. The fourth challenge, rather, is one having to do with voting rights. And we are in the middle of the most consequential election of my lifetime. This election will be the hardest election to administer since 1864, which is the election we had right in the middle of the Civil War. This one will be harder because we have fewer poll workers. We have fewer poll locations. We have lots of voter interest. Voter interest in this election is higher now than we've seen in any of the recent elections. By my count and by others' account, we've seen 50 times the number of votes cast already in vote by mail than we saw 4 years ago at the same time. So we knew that this year, 2020, was going to be incredibly challenging, but no one really quite anticipated how hard or how challenging a year it would be with this election, with this pandemic. And what lets me sleep at night after working really hard is knowing that I have some of the most fantastic, energetic, resilient, visionary colleagues in the country. And that includes especially the director of our Washington state office, Michele Storms. The last year and a half has shown Michele and all leaders of the organization that leadership matters. And Michele has led with everything she has. She has led with her head and with her heart, as the former UW Law School Dean Kelly Testi once said of her. At a time when this country is trying to wrap its mind around the pernicious history of its original sin of chattel slavery, it is critical that we have Black leaders raising the agenda, raising the flag on what needs to change and why, and leading us there. The ACLU of Washington represents the Black Lives Matter Seattle-King County in litigation against the Seattle Police Department. Through Michele, she has built alliances and coalitions with communities of color. She's doubled down on our efforts to be responsive and reflective of the communities of color who need our help, who demand our help, who deserve our help. And we are just so thrilled that Michele is the leader of our office in Washington State, exactly at the time when it matters most. During the week, we lost Ruth Bader Ginsburg, just weeks after the passing of John Lewis. Those were two iconic leaders for civil rights and civil liberties. It was the same week we learned that the state of Kentucky did not deliver justice for Breonna Taylor. It was the same time that the Seattle Police Department responded to protests in the city by running a bicycle over the head of a demonstrator. These were hard days, both in Seattle and Washington State and across the country. But Michele finds a way to kind of lead with elegance, with grace, with clarity, passion, with encouragement. And in an email that she sent to the staff that week, which I got a copy of, I wanted to share with you her own words so you can hear the type of leadership that Michele provides to our troops. She wrote to the staff, quote, "It's appropriate to grieve the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but remember to grieve her greatness. And then let's remember that we work for the ACLU. If there is any organization that can claw back our democracy and fight against the tyranny we are currently facing, it is this organization." He went on, "We do not know what the future will hold, but we know who we are. We know the warriors we are. We are the children of immigrants, descendants of those held in bondage, children of fiery mothers and grandmothers who overcame limitations and discrimination, descendants of the first people, the stewards of this earth. Regardless of each of our rich individual origin stories, I know it is true that our ancestors overcame so much. All of us come to this work with passion born out of experiences lived or witnessed, and we have shared a commitment to make the world better. We do it every day, and we're not going to stop. So let us grieve. As our ancestors' wildest, boldest dreams, let us continue to use all the tools available to do what is right, to make good trouble, to remain relentless for equity and justice. We are warriors, and we come from strong, overcoming ancestors," said Michele Storms. So now, do you have any doubt that we have the perfect woman leading the most important organization in Washington and indeed across the country at this time? Can you see why I sleep well at night? Can you see why I'm so grateful for her leadership, her vision, her energy, her humanity. And so I just wanted to say that I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person, but I'm there with you in every way in spirit. And I wanted to make sure I thanked you, Michele, for all the leadership you provided our organization, for your camaraderie, your colleagueship. And I thank you for the work you'll do in the years to come. We're so lucky to have you at the ACLU Washington. It's my great honor to introduce you now to Michele Storms, the phenomenal Executive Director of the ACLU of Washington State.
Thank you, Anthony. Good trouble is what we're here to do. Before Michele takes the screen, I want to say a few things about her. Michele Storm is a recognized leader in racial justice and civil rights advocacy. Prior to becoming the executive director, Michele served for 2 years as a deputy director. Michele was assistant dean for public service and founding executive director of the Gates Public Service Law Program at the UW School of Law. There, she developed a program to prepare young lawyers for a lifetime commitment to public service. Michele has also served on the Washington State Access to Justice Board, the One America Board of Directors, and as a board member and the Secretary of Management Information Exchange. She has done more than most. Michele earned her law degree from Gonzaga University School of Law and her bachelor's degree from Loyola Marymount University. Please help me welcome Michele Storm, the Executive Director of the ACLU of Washington.
The ACLU has been here for 100 years. Happy Centennial birthday, ACLU. That is 100 years of nonpartisan advocacy for the civil liberties of people living in the United States, regardless of their race, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, national origin, immigration status, abilities, or viewpoints. We have held every president and government accountable to the promises of freedom and democracy, and we have done this work in the courts, the legislative halls, and the public sphere. Over these 100 years, the ACLU has learned, grown, evolved, and risen to the challenges of the times at hand. We have come to understand that this democracy that we love, this Constitution that we use as a vital tool, has not treated all people fairly from the very beginning. One of our mottos is dissent is patriotic, and we must dissent when people proclaim that our country has no flaws. We have many flaws, and yet we care deeply about our country anyway. We know the country was built on the genocide of indigenous people, forced labor of African peoples, subjugation of women and children, and immigration policies that have disfavored people who are different based on religion or race. We can know this about our country, and we can care deeply about our country anyway. If we care deeply about our country, then we must fight for our country. We must fight for all the people who live in this country to be truly free. Whether that is freedom to protest, to be free from police violence, or to have access to the right to vote without barriers or suppression. We must fight for the freedom of each person to live in their gender or without a gender and be acknowledged for who they are. We must fight for the freedom of people living with disabilities to be their full selves with access to what they need to live a safe and healthy life. We must fight for the freedom of Black, Indigenous, and people of color to be free from police violence. We must fight for the reproductive health, safety, freedom, and choice of every human. These are our battles today more than ever. Many battles have been fought by the ACLU and our partners and our allies, and many fights remain. The Constitution is our tool, and even though we know when it was written, it was not intended to be applied to everyone, today we wield those powerful words, concepts, and laws on behalf of all, and especially on behalf of those who have been oppressed and made vulnerable by long-standing systems of oppression. When I said the ACLU has always been ready to address the challenges at hand, I must acknowledge that the challenges at hand right now are huge. We've all felt the effects of COVID-19, whether having to suddenly work from home, school kids from home, whether experiencing a job loss or an uncertain job market, whether we've been sick or seen our loved ones suffer from this terrible disease, COVID-19 has laid bare the holes in our healthcare system, and it has devastatingly exacerbated the racial disparities that still plague our country. Black people, Indigenous people, Latinx people, Pacific Islanders have been heavily hit by this disease. And as people who are often in the front lines working in the healthcare system, in agriculture, home health care, or providing basic services like childcare or grocery clerks, lower income individuals and people of color are dying at the highest rates. COVID-19 has exacerbated the worst and harshest of the disparities in our society. It has wreaked havoc on our rights and liberties as people living in this country. Jails, prisons, and immigration detention centers have become petri dishes and disease vectors, subjecting those caged there to a punishment far beyond a court-ordered sentence. For many, it has meant illness and death. In this country, where we incarcerate at rates far above any other nation and incarcerate for longer and longer sentences, we at the ACLU have long fought for criminal legal system reform and for an end to our system of mass incarceration. Under COVID, we fought to get folks safely freed and to great success. We've also fought for greater broadband access for kids getting schooled at home who don't have access to the internet at home. And we're fighting to ensure that kids living with disabilities continue to get the educational services they need. This is what it means to respond to the challenges of these times. As a country, we're still confronting the challenges of structural institutional racism, particularly as it shows up in police practices. We are devastated, along with you, at the continued loss of life, especially of Black people, at the hands of police without accountability. We're still waiting for accountability for George Floyd, who was so brutally murdered. And now we watch as Breonna Taylor's family continues to fight for justice after a stunning grand jury determination that did not hold her murderers accountable. In our own backyard here in Seattle, we've sued the Seattle police for their violent use of weapons against crowds, the very crowds protesting police violence. There is much work to do, and we join with those calling for transformation in policing, including taking resources from police budgets and redirecting them to community services that are better equipped to address community problems with cultural competence and nonviolence. The third challenge of our immediate times is the safety and security of democracy itself. Voting has already begun here in Washington and around the country. It does not matter what political party you belong to or who you support for public office. Democracy is precious to every one of us. And the ACLU, working with allies and community members here and throughout the country, will fight tirelessly to preserve it and to assure that your voice is heard loud and clear. We will continue to bring lawsuits and other actions against any official who dares to interfere with the electoral process. In these times, when seeds of doubt have been planted about the security of voting, I want to urge you to vote and have a plan to get your ballot turned in. Vote like your rights depend on it, because they do. Every vote counts, and the ACLU will make sure that every vote is counted. This work we don't do it alone. We do it with partner agencies and allies. We do it with the support of activists and donors and many friends. I want to thank our incredible staff at ACLU of Washington and ACLUs across the country who are talented, passionate, and oh so effective. I want to thank my family members who are the wind beneath my wings. And I want to thank all the individuals and organizations who support us and partner with us on various issues. I'm excited this evening to share a panel with you, a panel conversation with some incredible friends who do powerful work for equity and justice. Remember, we are in this together.
It is inspiring to see you shine in your leadership, Michele. Now, instead of bringing on a keynote speaker, Michele recommended a conversation celebrating tonight's theme. We are in this together. A theme, I have to point out, that came together last fall, well before it became the tagline, the rally call for things we're experiencing right now. Michele will moderate a conversation with our friends. Pui-Yan of SCAR, Spokane Coalition Against Racism. Pui-Yan is a professor of sociology at Eastern Washington University. Heather McKimmie has been an attorney with Disability Rights Washington since 2009. Marcus Harrison Green is the co-founder of the South Seattle Emerald, formerly the South King County reporter for the Seattle Times.
I'm so excited to be with some really wonderful people for a panel conversation this evening. As we've been talking about throughout this evening, our theme is We Are in This Together, and the work of preserving freedom and equity and democracy is truly a team sport. It requires partners and allies. It requires compadres in the cause, and I'm really excited to have these wonderful folks here. And so each of them is going to say a little bit about the work that they do. They've already been introduced to you. And then we're just going to be in dialogue together to talk about the work we do and why it's important and how we can be stronger together. So Pui-Yan, if you'd like to start, that would be great.
Great, thank you. So my name is Pui-Yan Lam. I'm in Spokane. I'm on the steering committee with Spokane Community Against Racism, SCAR. I also serve as the co-chair of Asian Pacific Islander Coalition Spokane chapter. And through APIC, Asian Pacific Islander Coalition, I am involved with the Spokane Coalition of Color, which comprises of the NAACP Spokane branch, Hispanic Business and Professional Association, Muslim for Community Action and Support, and also APIC Spokane, of course. And I served as our board member for Refugees Connections. I'm by no means a key or important leader of SCAR or in any of these organizations that I mentioned. So I don't want to give people the first impression about the significance of my role or contributions here in Spokane. But it happens that my involvement with these organizations put me into kind of the best seats in the room, so to speak, to witness the creation of different important coalitions over the last few years on social justice and immigrants' rights related work.
I really appreciate that. Heather, love to hear from you as well.
Sure. Hi, I'm Heather McKimmie. I'm an attorney at Disability Rights Washington. And to explain a little bit about Disability Rights Washington, we are the protection and advocacy agency for the state of Washington. It means we're a nonprofit, but we're given federal authority to go into facilities where people with disabilities live and receive services. We can go into places like mental health hospitals, prisons, jails, places that most of the general public cannot go. And we can go to the most isolated parts of those facilities. So we can go to solitary confinement, medical isolation, and suicide watch, places like that. We can also bring in cameras and quickly get records when we believe abuse or neglect is occurring. So when I say that we work with people with disabilities, I mean all kinds of disabilities. So physical disabilities, chronic health conditions, mental health disabilities, cognitive disabilities, developmental disabilities, learning disabilities, and sensory disabilities, and traumatic brain injury. Personally, I direct the AVID program, which focuses on people with disabilities in prisons and jails. And before I did that work, I was a criminal defense attorney. I've been involved in the criminal legal system for my entire legal career. And a really high percentage of people who are incarcerated in our jails and prisons in our state have disabilities. You think about folks are coming in with disabilities, but prison and jail themselves are really disabling places. So people may not have a disability when they come in, but they will come out with one, likely due to inadequate medical and mental health care. Our agency does our work in all kinds of different ways. because we are small, we can only focus on certain things. The people who are most impacted, that often means people who are in mental health housing or solitary confinement, medical isolation, places like that. And we try to do that work in an intersectional way, recognizing that folks who are really impacted by the criminal legal system often are Black, they're Native, they are people, we work in collaboration with other movements, and we are working toward collective liberation of people. We recognize that again, Black and Native and Hispanic populations are over-policed and over-criminalized. And all of those identities are intersecting with having disabilities, being members of other communities, like the LGBTQ community, and various religious backgrounds. So that's me, and I'm excited to be here and talk to you all.
Thank you, Heather. Marcus, would love to hear some introductory comments from you.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that I have to follow these two. I'm just in the newspaper business. But no, my name is Marcus Harrison Green. I am the founder and publisher of the South Seattle Emerald. It's a publication that was founded nearly 7 years ago now to tell the authentic narratives and stories of the historically marginalized in our region. We say at the Emerald that, there's this old maxim about the media exists to speak truth to power. And we think that's only half the story. Yes, it exists to speak truth to power, but it also exists to speak truth to people who have been told that they're powerless most of their lives. We want to remind them that they're not. The need for the Emerald, for me, came out of living in the south end of Seattle, which was an area when I was growing up that pretty much the only thing that was a focus of media and news at the time was either crime or urban blight or basketball, and nothing against basketball, but South Seattle at the time I was growing up held 3 of the top 10 diverse most zip codes in the United States. So you had this richness of culture and just this wonderful collaboration of people, every single day, wonderful thinkers and innovations and artists and writers and innovators who, never really got the fair treatment, I'll say, in terms of, being given a level of elevation on what they were doing within the community and how they were impacting not only our city, but our state and our country. And I always say that there's one story for me that stands out on why the Emerald exists and why we need independent media. And that was early on in my journalism career. It's probably 6 months before I founded the Emerald. I was on an assignment talking to folks in the Rainier Valley area, asking them what was good about their community. And I bumped into a young man on the corner of Henderson and Rainier Avenue South in Rainier Beach. And I asked him that question, what did he love about his society? What did he love about his neighborhood? And he said, nothing. I don't love anything about it. And I asked him why. And he said, because they say that, nothing's good about us. And he called himself a savage. And he said that, he was somebody that nobody cared about. And, I talked to him for, a little while longer, and it was obvious that was his thought process. And so I let it be. And I never forgot the young man because, 2 weeks later, he was unfortunately found dead with, a bullet in his head in a car, not too far from where I'd spoken with him. And I always thought, well, what if he had a different narrative, imparted with him? What if he had a different story that he held on to? And, we are the stories that we tell ourselves in our society and in our lives. And that's why I've continued to tell stories. And I traded in a lucrative career in investment and in finance to found the Emerald. And though it's quite a bit less lucrative, it's much more purposeful. And so I'm glad to be a part of this event today, and also just to be able to lean on the ACLU Washington, every so often to help tell some of these stories that need to be told.
Thank you so much, Marcus. And thank you, all of you. You all do such powerful work in the world from different perspectives, right, to advance equity and justice. And Pui-Yan, I want to come back to you and maybe have you elaborate a little bit more because you're involved with many organizations in Spokane.
I have friends and family over, in the Seattle area, and oftentimes people outside of Spokane don't really have very good understanding of what Spokane is about, or they have certain images about Spokane. And so I really want to paint a picture tonight about Spokane that might not be what some people have in mind, and especially the developments that we're seeing in the last few years. And definitely there is a changing landscape of racial justice work in Spokane that started a few years ago after Trump's election. And I think immediately with Trump's election, there was a lot of fear and anger that led people wanted to take some action. I think, for example, with his attempt to end DACA, with his attempt to create a Muslim registry and with Muslim ban. And so there were specific things that the communities felt that we had to respond to. And so we started to see people coming out at different events, rallies, city council meetings. For example, back in January 2017, we have people packing the city council chamber in support of an emergency ordinance that was an attempt to curb the creation of the religious registry that Trump was trying to introduce at that time. And we saw a lot of people showing up at protests and marches like the Women's March at that time. And this is not only about the number of people, the large number of people that were showing up, but also who were showing up. That we started to notice, more people of color showing up at these events. We started to kind of notice each other. And we started to see the Asian people that are showing up. So locally, the No Discrimination Spokane Coalition was formed because of something that was happening locally. So a group called Respect Washington was trying to introduce a ballot measure, Proposition 1, that was basically trying to take away some of the protection for immigrants and refugees that were introduced in our city's human rights code. And so there was an attempt to organize people from immigrants communities in response to that. And so in the end, we won in court, but the work that we put together to get ready to fight this proposition at the ballots brought people together. We built relationships among each other. I really believe that it was very instrumental to how some other coalitions were formed later on. So SCAR was formed in response to the acquittal of Eric Bushnell, a white man who shot and killed William Pondester, a Black man, by an all-white jury. We are also seeing kind of the creation of the very informal support networks for our communities of color. So not only we work together, we see each other in meetings, but also we are creating this interpersonal network to support each other. And I think it is very important given the context of Spokane, people of color could feel very isolated. Not only we see people of color getting engaged in all these different coalition, building this new organization, we also see people running for offices. For example, we have people running for school boards. Spokane School District now have 3 people of color serving on their board. We had also POC running for our city council seats.
That's really exciting, Pui-Yan, and you're really painting a picture of a very vibrant community that's dedicated to equity and justice. And I love to hear about that. And it actually makes me think a little bit about Marcus's story of how he came to found the South Seattle Emerald. And so I kind of want to turn attention back to you for a moment again, Marcus, and the fact that you created a paper that is based in a community to tell the stories of that community. And I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on why that's so important and what underlies that mission.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the question, Michele. I will say that, you know, to harken back to the play, the musical Hamilton, right? It's the whole situation of who lives, who dies, who gets to tell your story. And there's so much life that is wrapped up in your story. And for me, the Emerald's main mission is to just tell the truth, right? To tell the truth of a community. And I always say that the opposite of tragedy, or the opposite of news that is, you know, superficial and sort of one-dimensional, is not some sort of sugary, you know, just uber positive news and so forth, where you're sort of burying your head in the sand, so to speak. The opposite of tragedy is multidimensionality and nuance and complexity and humanity, and being able to give that to a community that for so long has, quite frankly, just been dehumanized by the news media and painted as a caricature and one-dimensional stick figures. Those things are important because you begin to see yourself as you are, as opposed to somebody else's idea of you. And we know that everything from bias to how people relate to other folks are based many times on the pictures that media gives them. I mean, that's that definitely, and bias, we know, you know, affects folks in terms of interactions with law enforcement, with interactions with the criminal justice system, interactions with teachers, and so on and so forth. And so to be able to create a picture that is more truthful, that is more about the life that is lived versus the life that is manufactured, is utterly important, I think, to our society. And so, you know, as important as the Emerald is, and I'm obviously biased in saying that it is, it's important, right, that every community has an organization that is like that, and that resembles the Emerald in the sense that it very much reflects the needs and the culture of the community that it serves.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more about media independence, and I'll be coming back to Pui-Yan again too. But I want to speak to Heather right now a little bit, because I wanted to ask you to both share a little bit about how COVID-19 is impacting your work, but also really would love to get into some of the juicy and good work we've been able to do together to overcome some of the difficulties.
Yeah, great. I mean, you know, COVID, it's impacting all of us, right? To talk, I guess, briefly about how it's impacted our work. You know, I consider the people that we work with, the people that our constituents are incarcerated for my program. And you know, all of a sudden not being able to go into those facilities and talk to people has been really hard for us as a group, to have almost now 7 months of us not being in the facilities and talking to people. Still had some measures of communication, and of course we still get letters from a lot of people. Some of our staff were sick. Some of our staff have childcare responsibilities, and you know, that impacts how much work we're able to do. So that was very overwhelming to have to shift, try to figure out how to work from home, still to get calls from people, and actually try to help folks. And we were hearing, of course, as we're doing this, what is going on with COVID inside a facility, which is, if you think about it, where people were dying was nursing facilities. And what's really the difference? In a lot of ways, you're inside a facility that's really closed down. You can't leave. People can't come visit you. The way the virus is coming in is through staff. And you don't have control over how you can social distance. You don't have access to PPE necessarily, or hand washing supplies. And the prisons and jails, you know, we're just navigating this like everybody else. This is brand new for everybody. And so there's bound to be problems. And their prisons and jails are obviously, they're worse in a lot of ways than nursing facilities because you're sleeping in dorm rooms, just, crammed in there. So we were working with the ACLU to put pressure on the governor and Department of Corrections to release people from prisons, because that is the way we're going to be able to have people socially distanced, is releasing folks. So there are a lot of advocates doing all kinds of different tactics, lawsuits, direct action. Ours was more focusing on the relationships we had built with the governor's office and Department of Corrections, trying to lobby, those. And so we're working with ACLU on that. And there, eventually some people, I think it was around 1,000 people did get released from prison through the work of all kinds of advocates. Yeah, it's been a big undertaking, but being able to partner with the ACLU has been really helpful in exchanging drafts and doing all the writing we're doing together and phone calls, dividing things up. Been very helpful.
No, it has been great, and we've really appreciated that partnership. And, the whole thing, has been very interesting because, as you pointed out, for people who are locked up, there is no social distancing. And, they don't have equipment and sanitizer and to the level that can keep them safe. And we know that there have been outbreaks in prisons in particular. And so it's pretty meaningful. And I guess the other thing I would say, and you might want to comment on this too, Heather, is just that, especially with the jails, a lot of the people who were released were people who, hadn't been convicted of anything, right? They were just they weren't able to pay bail. And, we sort of hope that maybe we can learn something from this, right? And I wonder what observation you have about that. And
yeah,
you hope that we can get out of this crisis in terms of mass incarceration in this state and in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great observation and point that so many folks, some of the jails were just figuring we shouldn't be booking people who are particularly vulnerable. Like if you have older people or people with chronic health conditions that make you more susceptible to COVID-19, jails were we're not going to take you in. Or their jails started putting booking restrictions in so that folks with really low level crimes weren't going to be filling up the jails. So there were those types of things were happening. And what we were trying to watch for is, was the sky going to fall with these jail populations really being cut some places in half or more? Was crime rampant? And I think we were finding that no, the answer was no. Same with all the people that were released from prison, 6 months early. Was there just a rash of crimes occurring? No. And so we're hoping to use that sort of leverage to say, we don't need to be expanding jails in the state. We don't need new buildings and new jails to be cropping up. We need to look at bail and reasons why jail is used or prison is used at all.
Thank you for that. Pui-Yan, before COVID happened, I was thinking about how one of the things that really occurred in Spokane that got a lot of your organizations very energized and got ACLU very energized related to a couple of different things, right? Racial disparity in school discipline out there. And then I think when the situation began to arise with Customs and Border Patrol at the Greyhound stations and the work they were doing there, it got all of us very alarmed about the rights and freedoms of people living in Spokane. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how some of that work unfolded.
So how it started was we could see after Trump's election, there were increased activities from Border Patrol agents at the Greyhound station, but in general in the city, in Spokane area. And so we have worked on the creation of our city ordinance that would hopefully curb some of these activities by Border Patrol. And also, that after that, we also have problem getting the city to actually enforce the ordinance that was passed. And so ACLU Washington was involved in every step of the way. And also we had widespread community support. So when the city council was going to vote on the ordinance, we had another packed city council chamber, and there was also kind of grassroots mobilizations for people to go to the Greyhound station to educate people so that you make sure that they know their rights. And also we have been doing a lot of work around school in terms of racial equity and also especially around school discipline, about police presence in school. And also this is an example of the kinds of collaboration and coalition that we have in Spokane. And so this is something that, for example, SCAR has worked with Every Student Count Alliance.
You know, what I really appreciate about that is, like, we all have such different roles to play, right? Like, there's grassroots organizers, there's individuals who show up, and, you know, I know with the Greyhound thing, there were people in the community who were just passing out know your rights materials. And then there's the legal counsel, right? And sometimes there's bringing a lawsuit. It takes all of these different aspects of advocacy, I believe, right, to actually accomplish the change that we want to see in our communities, where everyone can have their rights, you know, where everyone can have their rights and their freedoms. And so I know I'm so grateful. We are a statewide organization, but we don't have an office in every city of the state, right? And having community partners like SCAR and APIC and so many of the organizations in Spokane, and frankly, all around the state, is what makes it possible for you to help us and us to help you. And it's all to the same end goal, right? It's like, it's, you know, it's justice for people. So thank you for sharing that story. So Heather, I think I will come back to you, because one of the things that I know you've thought about a lot in your work as an organization that is also statewide, right? And that also has a really large mission to serve people with disabilities in so many ways. And I wonder how you see disability and race and other identities intersecting in the work.
And the work that the AVID program does with related to prison and jail, I mean, it's huge intersection. I mean, I already mentioned earlier how, you know, Black and Native and Hispanic peoples are over criminalized and over policed. And so that's who we're seeing when we go into the prisons. That's who we're seeing when we go into solitary confinement, where folks are even held, that disproportionality is exacerbated in those even more restrictive conditions. And when you have folks with mental health disabilities who are just overrepresented in the criminal legal system generally, when you add race on top of that, then you know, folks are getting longer sentences, they're in harsher conditions. And those are the things we're trying to grapple with as we work toward systemic change. And we're, as an agency, we're also grappling with the fact that the disability rights movement has been really white-led, has been really not focusing at all on incarceration or folks that are incarcerated. And, you know, and we're a nonprofit, and nonprofits are also really white-centered, rooted in white supremacy. And so, you know, here we are, you know, I'm a white woman working at a nonprofit, trying to do my best to align with principles that can advance folks toward collective liberation. And as an agency, we're trying to put forward the values of the disability justice movement, which was started by disabled advocates of color, specifically queer women of color, to focus on intersectionality and all the principles there. Leadership of the most impacted, interdependence, collective liberation. And, you know, we're working on those, and we're a work in progress. But there's a clear connection in race and disability.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And again, we need everybody of all identities, right? Being collective liberation is for all of us. And when, you know, like they say, we can't all be free till we're all free. And yeah. So it's just necessary. And I really appreciate the perspective that you bring to it and the awareness you bring to it. And I'm going to jump back to Marcus now, because, you know, it's a little different, you on the panel, because you're not, you know, the South Seattle Emerald is not an organization that we partner with, right? Like we partner with SCAR and APIC and DRW to get work done, but media is something different. And, you know, media can sometimes be a tool for us, and sometimes media can be mad at us. But I tell you what, what's most important is the independence of the media. And I would love for you to speak a little bit of what you see as important in terms of the media being independent, what threats you see to that, and what role you see of the media in advancing freedom and democracy.
Yeah,
Sorry
well,
for the long question.
no worries. And I'll say we do often have mutual interests, even though we don't necessarily formally partner. But yeah, I mean, I think it's important to have an independent media ecosystem, just in the sense that you have, if you look at the media industry right now, it's disproportionately white, disproportionately male, and disproportionately affluent, just in terms of sort of average median income. And so what is that going to mean? That means in practice, unfortunately, and in execution many times, is that the things and the people and the stories and the communities who are prioritized are the folks who are those who are white, male, and quite frankly, affluent. And when people of color are covered, or communities of color are covered, or other marginalized communities are covered, they're usually covered in a way that is very voyeuristic, and almost as if you're peeking into a community or you're parachuting into a community, and you can do nothing but sort of scratch the surface when that happens. I mean, you look at, I'll take the example of Manuel Ellis. He was a Black man in Tacoma who was killed by police officers there. Now he was killed in March. His story didn't end up, drawing headlines and being fully investigated until what, just a month ago or so, like in terms of it actually coming really to the fore and anything being done. And the main reason that happened was because a lot of independent media wouldn't let that story go, and kept digging, kept asking the Tacoma Police Department, who was supposed to be investigating the story, well, what was going on? And can it continue to hear back, oh, well, it's just an open investigation. And what ended up happening is that Governor Inslee ended up having to take away the investigation from the Tacoma Police and putting it in the hands of another department, I believe the Washington State Patrol, I want to say, in order for there to be some daylight in the story, and daylight in the case, and to really know what was going on, and to bring Manuel Ellis's family some sense and semblance of justice. And so, as I say, I mean, I think independent media is important because they are the ones who are covering these stories that nobody else, seems to care about. And again, the reason that they don't care about them many times is it's just that they are not from these communities, and they don't feel the impact and the effect, from these stories and from the lives that are touched by these stories. I'll tell another quick one. I had a friend, his name was Latrell Williams, and he ended up being killed 2 years ago. He was walking to the store to get some food for his son. It ended up that he was killed in what was a gang initiation where, a gang member had to, a gang member had to go and, kill just somebody. And Latrell just happened to be somebody who was walking right then. And I remember that his story, when first reported, it didn't even warrant. I guess other media thought that it didn't even warrant a full story. He was just kind of one of those blips in other news, and he was just treated as a statistic. But he wasn't a statistic. He was a man. He was a father. He had just fought 2 years to get sole custody of his son, and he was a friend as well. And to be able to share a story about his life and who he was as a human being, as a father, as a son, as a friend, as a coach. Those stories are important to community, and those are stories that are usually only told in independent media, because again, it's independent media who is purpose and mission driven a lot, and that purpose and mission isn't just a bottom line of the almighty dollar.
Those are such powerful stories and heartbreaking stories. And thank you for sharing that and the story you shared earlier. And I feel so sad and sorry for the loss, and grateful that you have found a way to give some meaning back to people's lives, to not be statistics, but to actually be the human beings that they are. And that's a beautiful thing. Pui-Yan, you've said a couple times that you wanted to tell about SCAR's platform for change. So I'd love for you to just give us a minute or two on what that is.
So the SCAR platform for change came about basically with all these kind of what's happening nationally after the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, with protests happening around the United States, including Spokane. And so, so there were protests in Spokane that were very well attended. And also you could see that there are outcry for not just, you know, incremental reform, but really drastic substantive changes in a police and criminal justice system in general. You see, you know, that there are, you know, people showing up at protests, you know, have signs or calling out the defunding of police and other things that people might not think this would happen in Spokane, you know, being, and again, you know, the impression of Spokane being so conservative, you know, to see who are showing up at the protests are also very significant. And we also, you know, in the protests, we saw a lot of young people of color showing up with a lot of energy, with a sense of commitment. And so I think the platform of change emerged in a time that, you know, there needs to be a direction where all this energy would go, and exactly what we want to see happen in Spokane, right, in our community. And so, so the platform for change that SCAR released really kind of created that vision or the sense of direction the community needed at that time. And I think it is also important, not just, you know, having that document, but also how we created the coalition to get 24 different organizations to support our platform for change was also a very significant development in Spokane. And so besides part of the platform for change that are about criminal justice reform, police accountability, we also have a part of our platform of change about housing justice. Especially with COVID, this is very important for Spokane. It is very important for our communities of color with the impacts that we are seeing in terms of economic impact, people losing jobs, for our tenants to have the protection. I'm confident with the momentum that we're building, with the coalition, that we are building, with the conversations that are moving, that we are kind of directing, that this is also a very kind of hopeful and optimistic time in Spokane.
Thank you for that. And I think that really leads me to want to jump back over to Heather and just ask you, in this moment, because, you know, Pui-Yan just gave us something that's hopeful, people really coming together and maybe not making progress as fast as they want, but coming together and making progress, right? What are some of the things that you do feel hopeful about or have hopes around with your work or your collaborations or your clients?
Well, this conversation made me really hopeful. I wanted to say something about how Marcus has been talking about humanizing people, and I feel like that is so important too with the population that we work with. And I think something that I'm really hopeful about is that I thought that when we got into working remotely, like that we would actually not be able to make new connections, and I'm not finding that to be true. I'm finding that we're able to strengthen connections with partners that we already had, like with the ACLU and other like legal organizations. But also there are these like awesome grassroots movements coming up where we're able to do some of that, like use the knowledge that we have of these systems to not just hold on to it, but spread it to people who have a lot of energy and a lot of desire to make changes, but might not have, they don't have the access to know how the prison mental health system works. So I can explain that. And then these big groups of grassroots folks who are interested in prison reform are, connecting with them and watching. I'm excited to see where this goes. There's a lot of movement around trying to decarcerate and abolish prisons that is building in Washington State that I do not think was here in these numbers. So I'm really excited about that and hopeful about that.
Thank you. And what's interesting is not only have we been able to keep a lot of relationships strong, even across having to always be in virtual platforms, right? But we're actually forming new relationships because now, we have these meetings and they're not in person and anybody can join, right? People from all around the state or from different organizations that maybe you didn't know about before. So that's been, interesting and hopeful and positive too. So I'm really glad that you called that out. It's really, I guess, a little bit of a silver lining. I mean, obviously, let's have COVID go away. So Marcus, I want to kind of wrap up with you and just ask you, as a journalist, as a community member, as a person who cares so deeply about humanity, I wonder what it means to you to have organizations like, SCAR and DRW and ACLU out there, and what does that mean for the community, and where is hope for you in this work?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think, seeing and listening to all of you today, I mean, it's just a reminder that, yes, we live in dark times, but there will always be light as well. And, as somebody who makes a living telling stories, yes, we can continue to harp on the story which is true, that this, country is steeped in and has white supremacy and patriarchy and ableism and homophobia and transphobia baked into it. And that is true. It's also true that there have always been people in our society who are trying to advance the society. And I think back to the fact that there wasn't one Black person who voted for the 13th Amendment. And yet, right, it passed, and chattel slavery is illegal. There wasn't one woman who voted for the 19th Amendment, and yet my mother on November 3rd will be joining all of you in voting for the president. And I know this is nonpartisan, so I won't tell you who she's voting for, but you all know. And but no, I mean, I think again, it's we live in a society where fortunately we can continue to advance, and that fight is often lonely at times and often hard, but it's worth doing. It's worth waking up every day and fighting for a better society, and knowing that the ACLU Washington is there, knowing that all of our organizations are there, attacking it by air, land, and sea. It doesn't mean that we are not alone, and that this fight is worth doing, and maybe we'll see the outcomes that we want in our lifetime. Maybe that it means that we need to pass the torch, but this is a race that needs to be run. And I know that there's a lot of grief piling up in 2020, but I also think that there are a lot of reserves of hope and of activity. And so you have to just keep moving every day, and you have to keep fighting every single day. And I'm glad to be enlisted with all of you.
Well, I am certainly glad to be in all of this with all of you, and really appreciate the gift of your time this evening for our conversation, but more importantly, the gift of the work that you do in the communities, in your various different communities, and your commitments to liberation for all. And I guess just knowing that we are in this together. So I want to thank you so, so much. Really appreciate our time together. Thank you.
And now, tonight's awards. The Civil Libertarian Awards was established in December 1977 to honor those people who have made outstanding contributions to the ACLU of Washington, or to civil liberties in Washington State. This year is extraordinary because for the first time, it's being presented as the Kathleen Taylor Civil Libertarian Award. And we have none other than Kathleen herself to present it. Kathleen was the executive director of the ACLU of Washington from 1980 to 2019, leading the organization as it grew from a 2-person to nearly 15-person staff, and during a time where the ACLU of Washington was a leader on issues that continue to be of crucial concern today. Ranging from Washington's successful initiatives in 1991 that created state abortion protections that do not depend on Roe v. Wade, to the advancement of important reforms to laws that have long oppressed low-income and minority populations, including drug laws, criminal procedures, and in police conduct.
Thank you, Monserrat, and thank you, ACLU Board of Directors, for this tremendous honor of naming an award for me. I am very pleased to present the award to Lila Silverstein and Neil Fox for their epic role in ending the death penalty in Washington. Their careful, persistent, and compelling legal work over a period of 6 years led the Washington Supreme Court to conclude unanimously that the use of the death penalty was infected with racial bias, arbitrary, and had to end. More about that work in a minute, but first a few words about Lila and Neil. Lila spent about a dozen years working at Microsoft before her passion led her to the University of Washington Law School. Since graduating in 2006, she has worked at the Washington Appellate Project, representing indigent clients in criminal appeals. Meanwhile, she has also been a volunteer for the King County Bar Association, the Criminal Defense Lawyers, and the ACLU. While her death penalty victory may well be the highlight, Lila has helped advance fundamental fairness through many important cases. As ACLU amicus, she helped convince the Washington Supreme Court to dismantle debtors' prisons. The case involved a young man from Spokane who spent 10 times his original jail sentence incarcerated for missing payments he was too poor to pay. Lila also worked on the team that led the Washington Supreme Court to adopt the first court rule in the nation designed to stop implicit racial bias in the selection of jury members. Finally, Black and brown people won't be summarily ejected from serving on juries. Neil Fox has represented thousands of clients in felony and misdemeanors and capital cases. Neil started his career at the Washington Appellate Defenders in the 1980s. He then served as a staff attorney and supervisor at the Seattle King County Public Defender Association for 13 years, and then about 10 years ago started his own firm. Throughout his legal career, Neil has been an essential member of the National Lawyers Guild and deeply involved in supporting demonstrations through the Guild's demonstration hotline, which provides information and advice to demonstrators and arranges for legal representation. That work is as important now as ever. Neil grew up in Skokie, Illinois, the town known for a controversial ACLU case in 1978 involving the right of Nazis to march. I understand that it was largely this case and the ACLU's advocacy that led Neil to law school. Neil earned his bachelor's, master's, and law degree from the University of Illinois. Now let's hear some more about Lila and Neil's monumental victory against the death penalty.
This court should not tolerate a system in which we are deciding who lives and who dies based on the color of their skin.
Which your relief would...
This case is State versus Alan Gregory. Mr. Gregory was convicted of the crime a long time ago. This was actually the second appeal, and he'd been in prison the whole time, a very long time. But he was very, very fortunate, all of us very fortunate, that lawyers are appointed to do the appeal. On death penalty cases, 2 lawyers are appointed, which is a little different. And then especially great that the 2 lawyers who were appointed to this case were Lila Silverstein and Neil Fox. From the very beginning, they just did a tremendous job. They just threw everything they had into the case. Tremendous dedication in addition to the countless number of hours and hard work they put into the case.
It was clear that given the results of Dr. Beckett's and Dr. Evans' research, there was a real opportunity to address the unconstitutionality of Washington's death penalty. As the ACLU brief convincingly asserted, the death penalty in Washington was fatally flawed. It was arbitrary and resulted in death sentences that often were determined by geography, whether the county's purse could sustain the expense, and fraught with racial bias, with Black defendants facing the death penalty at several times the rate of white defendants.
It was a chance to very directly say that the way Washington was carrying out the death penalty was racially biased, and the statistics showed that.
And we know that if you're African American, somewhere between 3 and 4.5 times you're more likely to get the death penalty than if you're white. We know that 4 of the 9 people on death row in Washington are African American, 44% of death row, while we make up 4% of the state's population.
It is one thing that we still see brutal wars and violent crimes here and around the world, but in the 21st century, to have our society engage in the state-imposed killing of defendants is something that is morally unconscionable and finally, here in Washington, unconstitutional. So much credit goes to Lila Silverstein and Neil Fox, whose incredible work over 6 long years included analyzing and making clear the statistical report of the professors. Many of us watched the oral argument so ably made by Ms. Silverstein and Mr. Robinson. Looking back over my emails with other retired judges, I find my own comments, brilliant in one email, stellar in another, referring to their arguments. One judge emailed me that perhaps the Supreme Court would not rule on the critical issue. I told her I was glad that Jeffrey Robinson didn't hold back. He made it crystal clear that the court had a responsibility to rule and to find that our statute was unconstitutional.
But if we're talking about who lives and who dies, especially with the legacy that we have in this country about race and the death penalty, I'm asking you to think about strange fruit hanging from poplar trees.
This is a landmark case, constitutionally correct, and on the right side of history and of civilization itself, I think. We can all be proud of the remarkable work done by Ms. Silverstein and Mr. Fox and their associating attorneys, of the effort by the ACLU and by our state Supreme Court. Congratulations on this wonderful recognition, Lila and Neil. It is so well deserved.
Well, good evening, everyone. I'm sorry we couldn't be together in person, but I'm grateful to the people who worked so hard to produce this virtual event. I want to thank my family and friends and colleagues for their support during the many years we worked on the Gregory case. I'm grateful to my co-counsel, Neil Fox, and social scientists Catherine Beckett and Heather Evans for being amazing teammates. Our work, of course, built on the work of many others who fought the arbitrary and racially biased death penalty in Washington over the years. I'm grateful to the ACLU not just for this lovely award, but also for being one of the organizations that provided outstanding amicus support in the Gregory case. But just as importantly, I'm grateful to the ACLU members who got up really early on February 25th, 2016 to board a bus to go to Olympia to support us as we argued the case in the state Supreme Court. People had to be turned away at the door because you filled the courtroom, and we really appreciated your being there. You know, like you, I'm an ACLU member. I'm a longtime ACLU member because the ACLU is a one-stop shop for defending all constitutional rights. As just one example, the ACLU defends both the 14th Amendment right to be free from race discrimination and the 14th Amendment right to be free from sex discrimination. I'm embarrassed to say that for all of these years that I've been fighting racism in the criminal justice system, I stayed silent about sexism perpetrated against me and my colleagues and other women because I thought if I complained about sexism, nobody would listen to me when I spoke about racism. But I was wrong. In fact, I remember one oral argument I had in the Court of Appeals many years ago in which I was explaining that the prosecutor engaged in improper race discrimination in jury selection. And after I very calmly presented my legal argument, the prosecutor stood up and told the court that I was engaging in histrionics. In other words, he invoked a counterfactual sexist dog whistle to defend their racist jury selection. But I said not a word, and the judges said not a word, and I lost the race discrimination case, and I swallowed another sexist indignity. So it does no good to stay silent, and I appreciate that the ACLU speaks out about everyone's rights and that it speaks out against both racism and sexism. And I'm thrilled that Neil and I are receiving the Civil Libertarian Award in the very first year since it was renamed for the great Kathleen Taylor, in a year in which another kick-ass woman, Michele Storms, was formally introduced as executive director, in a year that marks the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, and in a year in which we unfortunately lost the founder of the ACLU Women's Rights Project. The rest of us must carry on and must speak up, and I thank the ACLU for doing just that. Thanks again and have a great evening.
Hi, I'm Neil Fox. I want to thank you all so very much for this award. The ACLU is in my personal pantheon of heroes, so I'm really touched to receive this recognition from an organization that I have always admired, and one that I've always looked up to since I was a teenager, actually. While I'm honored by this award, it's important to realize that the ACLU played a really significant role in the Gregory case. From its amazing amicus brief, ultimately signed off on by 75 retired judges, to national support from Cassandra Stubbs of the ACLU's Capital Punishment Project, to Jeff Robinson's incredibly meaningful and poignant oral argument with us at the Supreme Court in February of 2016. And we are so very grateful for that support. The ACLU's partnership with us in Gregory illustrates that in these trying times, we need to work together. There is this myth of a solo criminal defense lawyer who rides into town on a white horse, does battle with evil, and then rides off into the sunset. And that's a myth, both in the legal world and in the political world. All successful efforts at long-term change require collaboration, require collective action. We can only change society through collective efforts. When we ally ourselves with others fighting similar battles against oppression, we become stronger. And this is a really important lesson to consider and to ponder as we go forward in the coming weeks and coming months and coming years. The challenges in front of us are incredibly significant at every level. But I know that with collective effort, with the hard work of groups like the ACLU, in coalition with others, that we will come through these trying times to the other side, and we will bask in the warmth and sunshine of a society built upon racial and economic justice, a society built upon equality, liberty, love, and respect for each other. So it's with this message that I am very, very grateful to the ACLU again for giving me and to Lila this award. Thank you very much.
Our second and final award of this evening is the William O. Douglas Award, a Lifetime Achievement Award honoring outstanding and sustained contributions to the cause of civil liberties and freedom. Presenting this award is the ACLU of Washington's Board President, Tana Lin. Tana is a proud immigrant and an attorney with the Keller Rohrbach in the plaintiff side complex litigation class action group. She was cooperating attorney for the Doe versus Trump case that successfully ended the portion of the Trump's bans separating former refugees living in the U.S. from reuniting with their spouses and children.
Thank you, Monserrat, and good evening, ACLU supporters. It is my honor to present this award to the University of Washington Center for Human Rights for their tireless vigilance to make sure America is fair to everyone, including refugees and immigrants. Accepting on behalf of the University of Washington Center for Human Rights is Angelina Snodgrass Godoy. The daughter of a Colombian mother and an American father, Angelina is a professor of law, societies, and justice and the Jackson School of International Studies. She is a sociologist by training, whose research focuses on human rights in Latin America. Prior to pursuing her doctorate, she worked at Amnesty International, and she credits her experiences among human rights activists at Amnesty, as well as many other organizations, as the principal inspiration behind her work. At the University of Washington, Angelina serves as the Helen H. Jackson Endowed Chair in Human Rights and the founding director of the Center for Human Rights, an interdisciplinary center that promotes teaching, research, and engagement across the curriculum in all 3 UW campuses, and in partnership with local, national, and international organizations actively working for human rights. Angelina earned her bachelor's degree at Harvard and her master's and PhD at UC Berkeley. Let's turn our attention to the work of the center.
In Washington State, we are so lucky to have a robust and engaged and collaborative immigrant rights movement that has done so much to combat Trump's cruel and misguided immigration agenda here in Washington. And groups that we work with all the time, like WAISN and La Resistencia, Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, Central Washington Justice for Our Neighbors, and so many more, have been sounding the alarm and sharing the stories of those most impacted by immigration enforcement, ICE arrests, ICE detention, and deportation.
Under the historic community-led victory, Keep Washington Working, those IGSA contracts are no longer lawful in the state of Washington once they expire. But the xenophobic culture and the business of family separation continues to thrive in our state. WAISN began to receive an increase of calls from Eastern Washington describing men in plain clothes following people with Latinx surnames at the courthouse and aggressively taking people into unmarked cars once they stepped out. These men would refuse to identify themselves until after the fact or present a judicial warrant. Community members that were detained at these courthouses would be placed in the deportation pipeline, which started by being processed at county jails holding contracts with ICE to house undocumented people overnight, profiting off of family separation. Our community is placed in deportation camps, like the Northwest Detention Center, where they are caged in inhumane conditions and are then taken to Yakima's airport to be deported.
UW Center for Human Rights got the receipts, and because of that, we were able to draft statewide legislation to make sure that what was happening doesn't happen again. And we could be so detailed because of the research and investigation that UW Center for Human Rights provided.
I think the benefit of the Center for Human Rights and their expertise on getting deep into documents, records, other things that we required to find out more brought into light what we already knew. We already knew that youth is also being detained by ICE in prisons, literally prison settings. So it was really important for us to be able to collaborate with them, and now we came together as different entities to support the local organizing in Cowlitz County, where we expect that really soon that contract that the county jail has with ICE ends before the contract expires next year.
Angelina Godoy and Phil Neff and their team at UW Center for Human Rights have been classic co-conspirators, working with impacted community, with local advocates to make sure that we can figure out what our government is doing. And that is essential not only to the immigrant rights movement, but to democracy in Washington. And that's how we keep our governmental institutions accountable and how we make them answer to us.
Thank you very much. It's my great privilege and honor to accept this award on behalf of the University of Washington Center for Human Rights. The UW Center for Human Rights is a unique institution. We were created just over 10 years ago by the Washington State Legislature and given the mandate, unique in the nation, to work for real-world change in human rights through our research in partnership with Frontlines human rights advocates. So it's a tremendous challenge and an honor and an opportunity to do that work every day. I would not be able to do any of it if it weren't for my indefatigable team of student researchers, student advocates, and faculty and staff leaders in this work. So if we were meeting in person, I would ask all of them to come up on the stage and accept the award with me. But then I would also have to ask all of our partners, our grassroots partners and frontlines advocate partners, to join us as well, because everything we do would not be possible without that active partnership, which challenges us and pushes us and makes it possible for us to do our work. The ACLU is in fact one of our most valued partners. We're particularly grateful for the chance to work with Inoka Herat, but many others at the ACLU and at many other organizations, including some that are here represented today. I know Monserrat Padilla from WAISN is here tonight. We are very honored to be able to work with them and so many other grassroots organizations. So while it's a great privilege and a pleasure to accept this award in recognition for our work, I'd like to turn it all back to all of you and take this as recognition of the beauty of the work that we can accomplish working together for human rights. Thank you.
Wow, thank you for such an inspiring event tonight. Now I know that 2020 has not been easy on nobody, but this year we're called upon to do something extraordinary. We're called upon to vote in November. So happy voting, everybody. We got this. We're in this together. Thank you for attending tonight's event. And now stick around for some music with singer-songwriter Shayna Shepherd. Thank you so much. Good night.
Hello, ACLU and supporters of the ACLU. My name is Shayna Shepherd, and I'm honored to be here with you to provide you a little bit of music as we move through the passage of this next season. This first song is called Apple Tree, and I'd like to acknowledge the fact that we are on Duwamish land. Fruit from an apple tree fall fondly on me, and with your gift so sweet I'll come to see the earth in rebirth. Bark from an apple tree, split swiftly for me, with every splinter chip and fallen leaf yields a profit you will never see. A home for you is a home for me. If life was merely mortality, if we killed the lights, then all we'd see is sky. Oh, I try to grow. If I reap what I sow, ground beneath an apple tree, hard beneath my feet, the freedom to run, the freedom to flee, the fear of the fall, the truth within, a tumble down, a hole for you is a haunt was merely mortality. Oh, if we kill the lights, all we see is sky. Oh, I try to grow. I try to grow. Oh, I try to grow. If I reap what I shall seed from an apple tree. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I'm here at my favorite place in, I think, just about the whole city. I'm at Tim's Tavern here in Seattle, Washington. One of the only places that we can still kind of make music come out of by making streams and streaming. So I want to say thank you so much to Tim's Tavern for providing this space, a place of comfort for me since I started in music. This song is written about that sense of comfort, actually. Perhaps when we feel like we have the most to give, we try to give as much as we can so that we can rest when it's time for that cup to be refilled. But this song was written for me from a place of really trying to figure out how deep my cup is so that the next time it is filled, it won't be shallow. And it's called The Ones Nobody Really Knew. From a perch above the people, I can see the church's steeple, boldly pointed premonition, barely breeze so I can listen. Listen to the church bells toll, watch the clock face bear its soul. Killing time makes time a ghost. Haunted head games diagnosed and medicated. Keeping your thirst satiated. Keeping my thoughts in my head. Left my fighting chance for dead. Dead-end jobs and living lies. We only kissed goodbyes and only huddle when it's cold. And I can feel myself get old. I can feel myself get old. I can feel myself let me go. We're going way too fast to grow. Oh no, so let me go. We're going way older than that steeple's church, built on solid, sinful earth, held up by your father's fears, salted by my mother's tears. That we might die alone again, and that these lives might surely end. And it'll just be me and you, the ones nobody really knew. It would be remiss for me to ignore the state of the world that we're dealing with right now. It's important than ever, the work that the ACL does. I understand that my rights are being championed so that my children's rights can be championed. And the same fights that my grandmother fights are the same rights that my great-grandmother fought. And without brave people to take accountability for the past, our future is forgettable. I've been playing with the loaded gun while all you rabbits run for fun. I've been flirting with the dirty youth, the moon mistaking what he took. I've been burning all the evergreens with tufts of cotton at my sleeve. And I've been waiting, 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 I've been waiting for free. On the internet, just watching spiders in their webs. I've been maxing out my credit cards to drape myself in camouflage. They've been calling me a work of art, maybe sparking what they buy. But I've been taking, I've been taking, I've been taking. Oh, I've been taking, I've been taking, I've been taking. Oh, I have been taken, I have been taken, I have been taken for free. Behind that door, a key was planted firmly on the floor. I would have been concerned if I had not just had the dream the night before. That hole was full of blood of many brown souls. Oh, This is the kind of art you make when you're stuck at home. Thank you. Well, thank you. Stuck at home art, speaking of. Just a couple more for you guys here. I wrote this song in the quarantine, living alone in a box apartment, and I was like beating my head up against the wall. I know we've all been feeling that, this little creepy crawly sensation when you wake up in your own system every single day. Wake up in your own, I don't even know how to describe it. Why don't I just sing about it? This song is called The Virus. Heartless, heated, my energy depleted, holding heavy, about to break the levee. Pressure building, I can't escape the feeling that escape ain't really free and escapades ain't really cheap. Bottles broken, how else do they get open? Cautious strangers are sure to be the danger. Tortured glances, maybe missed romances. Oh, what are the chances they'll survive? Oh, what are the chances that they'll survive? The virus. Can you feel it creeping in? Can you feel it? Can you feel it creeping in? The virus fell beneath your skin. Can you feel it creeping in? The virus fell beneath your skin. Can you feel it creeping in? The virus fell beneath your skin. Can you feel it? Sure can. Oh, thank you. I just have a couple more songs for y'all. I think I'm gonna just jump ahead. Just gonna do stuff. I always be doing that. I always be changing things in the last minute. Just keeps things fresh. Almost feels like a live show, huh? Hey, you out there. This song, I just wrote this, actually. To save time and energy, I guess I'm going to do this thing where I'm going to combine two songs. One of the songs is called Say It. And I think it's important for a lot of us to just kind of remember that everybody's going through their own thing right now. I know I'm getting this lesson every day. Not to take things so seriously, but that the most incredible currency that we have these days is to be the ability to communicate. So that is that. And the other one is another song I just wrote called Just Gotta Be Okay, because I think it's important to give each other grace and ourselves grace. What you can accomplish, what you can do is just good enough. So. Sorry, Wyatt. scratching at the surface now, trying hard to work it out. So much has been misunderstood. This mystery only leads to dawn. I didn't understand when you reached out to take my hand. And if you have something to say, say it now. Scratching at the surface now, trying hard to work it out. So much has gone misunderstood, and this mystery only leads to doubt. I didn't understand when you reached out to take my hand. If you had something to say, say it now. This is what you waited for. Your chance to even know the score. And as this shadows fall on the nation, I'm picking up the message alone and closer than I've ever been before. If you have something to say, say it to me now. Say it to me now. Waterworks, let me drown. Let the gauge flood, let my frown hang down. Cut my hair, lay down my crown. I don't gotta be the strong one now. I just gotta be okay. I just gotta be okay. Someday. Waterworks, let me drown. Let the gates flood, let my crown hang down. cut my hair, laid down my crown. I don't gotta be the strong one now. I just gotta be okay. I just gotta be okay. Someday. Now we're in there. Cut my clothes, and I suppose only angels know where its stories go. Played my part in a wave of sparks. I don't gotta be a Joan of Arc. I just gotta be okay. 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 Someday. This is the last song. Did I do this? Dang. This is the one. So the reason I'm doing this show is because I met Michele at a Martin Luther King Day celebration at University of Washington. And I performed this song. We had a great conversation, and it was such a beautiful performance. It was just a great, I sound like Donald Trump. It was a great thing. There were great people there. It all worked out. In lieu of that, I will say this song is about resistance and tackling bigger themes of racism and subjugation in our community by dealing with the self and just having conversations, communicating one-on-one, and leading with love and understanding. Thank you so much, ACLU, for having me. Thank you so much, Tim's Tavern, 105th, for having me here in Seattle, Washington. I'm Shana Shepard, and I am so honored to be with you guys. Crossing the track reminds me that every reaction just keeps him keep holding me back to the front of the lines where I preached while I pounded rose glasses of wine. I suppose perhaps that Miss Stein got it wrong when she told us a rose is a rose, rather red, but reading is so fundamental and keeping me mentally fed. So they said loud on the intercom, but it's often quite hard to hear from the back of the bus. I fall into the trap, the lie that my brilliance is balanced by booty that he wants to tap, like a keg filled with the blackest gunpowder, a fine silty substance of dread. I once read of a dream that a reverend had, for he was shot in the head. But who knows the books that I
had pages ripped out in the back. Not a fact often spoken on, but it's often quite hard to hear from the back of the bus. Oh, pardon me, but won't you please adhere to my request? You're standing strong right on my back, so why not take a rest? No, not on your own laurels, but if you want, be my guest. It's not much fun to stand alone, but less to be abreast. And if you find that bite too bitter for you to digest, enjoy your front seat on our bus and keep on journeying west. I'll keep on waiting on that train to Jordan with the rest of the mammies, martyrs, mothers, daughters in their Sunday best, singing, singing, but it's often quite hard to hear. Ooh, often quite hard to hear. Yes, it's often quite hard to hear from the back of the bus. Thank you very much.
Round of applause. Yay.
We have held